Greetings! In this video we will create a basic brick. The tools and techniques that we develop here will be used for all of our subsequent brick building lessons, including our intermediate and advanced brick building. Okay, let's get started. We'll begin with a polycylinder. Polycylinder, we'll click on that. That gets created at the origin. You can click on the panel and tap the F key to focus that. We'll come and make the channel box active. And we'll come down to inputs. Polycylinder 1, we'll click there. And we're going to change the subdivision axis to 8. We're going to be subdividing this object, so 8 is a good starting point. We'll come to the height and we'll make this 0.8. So that is the height of the peg that will sit on the top of our brick or bricks. And we need to raise this to the origin line here. So we will type in 0.4 on the Y. Quick review. Subdivision axis 8, height 0.8, translate Y 0.4. We're going to delete the faces on the bottom. We'll right click and choose face, and with the shift key we'll make a multiple selection around of those 8 bottom faces. Now when you're selecting faces in the shaded mode, it's a good idea to hit the 4 key to make sure you didn't have anything selected on the other side. If I had, I could hold down the control key and draw a bounding box to deselect those faces that I inadvertently had selected, if I had. And then we'll just hit the delete key on the keyboard. I'll hit the 5 key to get back to that, and we can see we've deleted the bottom set of faces on that peg. Now we'll double click this edge. I right clicked to 12 o'clock edge, and we're double clicking the bottom edge. When we double click the edge, that gives us the loop all the way around. And we're going to open our modeling toolkit, and we're going to extrude that edge. Up until now we've been extruding faces. Here in this lesson we'll be extruding edges. We're going to click extrude, and we can either pull on the blue handle, which is Z, or you can click on the local Z here and scale that up. I'm going to just pull it out to about 0.6 there, and we're going to jump into the top view. So I'll tap my space bar, and make sure that we're in the top view. I'll hit the F key just so we're nice and close, and I'm going to hit the Q key just to get out of that tool, and we'll right click to object mode. We are going to snap these vertices to form a square, which forms the basis of all of our subsequent bricks. We'll right click and choose vertex, and just a note here when we're snapping, I'm going to tap the W for the move tool, or you could manually select it there. Now I see red and blue. That means that I can snap on both the X and the Z axis direction. And what I recommend here is that you hold down the X key, and with your middle mouse button, click on what you'd want to snap to. I'm just going to hit the Z key to undo that. The reason is sometimes as a beginner, when you come to click here, if you were going to click and drag it over, you might accidentally hit the arrow. Now that red arrow, the X arrow, is now yellow, which means I'm constrained. And now if I were to hold down the X key, you see that I can only snap on that axis direction. I'm going to tap the Z key to undo, and we know that we can click back in the middle to see the X and the Z. So as we snap this square, we want to see blue and red. We will avert the mistake of activating one of those axes and therefore limiting us to that direction by holding the X key in the middle mouse button, and we're clicking on what we want to snap to. I'll grab this and we'll X key, middle mouse button, and I'm just snapping to the grid. I'm clicking on what I want to snap to. I'm not going to grab it and pull it. I want to click and snap, grab the vertex, hold down the X key, middle mouse button, snap. Select the vertex, X key, middle mouse button, snap. And then our last one here, X key, middle mouse button, snap. And we've created this square here. So just one more review. If I click, I might accidentally activate one of the axis directions, and then I'm constrained. So now I would be constrained only on that direction. I want to see both colors. I want to see X and I want to see Z, blue and red. And I'll hold the X key and middle mouse button snap on what I want to snap to, which in this case is the grid. Okay, I right click back to object mode and we'll jump back into the perspective view. And a word here on subdividing. We are ultimately going to subdivide these bricks. Remember that the 3 key is a shortcut to show us what a subdivision will look like, one subdivision. I'm going to hit that back to 1. And so we don't want it soft, so we want to add edges around here, and we can do that with the bevel tool. Rather than manually adding edges, the bevel tool will automatically create edge loops parallel to the edge that we have selected. So we will right click to 12 o'clock edge, and I'm double clicking. Once again, double clicking gives us the edge loop. If we hit the 4 key, you can see that a little bit better. And we can bevel multiple edges at the same time. So now I'll shift double click this edge, hold down the 4 key, and you can see that there. And we'll come over to the bevel tool. I'll click bevel, and we'll hit that 5 key. And we'll manually type in these values. We'll put 0.2 for the fraction, so that's the distance, and then we'll put 2 here for the number of segments. And then to get out of the tool, I'll hit the Q key, and we can right click, hit the Q key, and we can right click to object mode. And now when we hit the 3, you can see that that hard edge is maintained vertically, but we still have the circle or the circular peg. Now, we want to save this, and we'll do one more thing before we save it. Let's put the pivot at the bottom. So I'm in the front view. You could be in the front or the side view. And I'm going to tap the D key. Tapping the D key means that we can reposition the pivot point. And as I pull this pivot point up, I've activated the Y. In this case, we do want to constrain ourselves on one of the axis directions. I want to constrain us on the Y. And we're going to snap it to the bottom of this peg, right? It started out in the middle, and we would like it to be on the bottom before we save it. So I tap the D key, I moved it up, and then now I'll hold the V key. Recall that V is for vertex or point snapping. And once again, I'll use my middle mouse button. So V key, middle mouse button, and we snap that down there to the bottom. And then be sure to get out of the mode by tapping the D key again. And so now I've repositioned the pivot at the exact bottom, and when we move on to creating additional bricks, we will be starting on the ground plane, which is what we want with this peg. I'm going to review that real quick. We'll say modify center pivot to get it back to where it was. I tap, if we just move it, right, we're transforming it. I'm tapping the D key to reposition the pivot. I'm going to select the Y translate. In this case, I do want to be limited to the Y. I'll hold the V key, I should say, and middle mouse button, click on what I want to snap to, and it puts it at the bottom. I'm still in the reposition mode, so I'll tap the D key a second time to get out of that. And now we can grid snap from the bottom of the peg, which is more practical as we create our additional bricks. And so this peg is the starting point for all of our bricks. And so you want to save this, save as or save peg, and then as we move on, make sure that you don't save over that. So you could immediately do a save as after you do the save for this peg. That means the next time we start in the next series of video lessons, you'll be able to just open this file and begin at this point. You won't have to recreate this peg. All right, we're going to create our first brick, and it will just be a standard 1 by 1. We'll extrude this edge down. So I've double clicked and I have the edge loop around, and we'll hit extrude. And again, we're going to be driving it on the Z, and I can type in the exact number. So it's going to be negative 4.8. Negative 4.8 on the local translate Z. I'll hit return or enter. And as we move out here, I'll also hit the Q key, and we'll come back in object mode, and we'll just take a look at that. So that is the total length, 4.8 units. And that gives us the height of our brick relative to this peg shape here. Now the bottom's open, and so we want to close that, and we're going to create a simple recess. We consider this the basic one by one. We will create additional bricks with the cylinder or pipe in the middle for those that are 2 by 2 or larger. And then we'll create the recesses underneath the peg as well, and we'll consider that the advanced brick. And you'll be able to create that by the end of this first semester. All right, let's close this off. We're going to double click the edge. So I have that edge selected, hit the 4 key. Right, we have that edge going all the way around. And we're going to come up to Mesh, Fill Hole. So with that edge selected, Mesh, Fill Hole. And we've closed off the bottom. But we still have a little bit of work to do before we proceed. If we hit the 3 key, you can count the edges a little bit better. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Remember that we want everything to be four-sided. When we're modeling, you're typically modeling for the purpose of subdividing at least once. And subdivisions work on quads. They work on four-sided faces, or they work predictably. And so we want to make sure that we have four-sided. Anything more than four-sided is considered an n-gon. N standing in for number and gon, so a polygon with more than 4 sides. We're going to use our multi-cut tool to just connect this edge to this edge, and this edge to this edge, and then we'll have 4. We'll select the multi-cut, and I'll click on the edge, and you can see that it's showing us the percent total. And we'll just drag it, in this case, all the way to 100%. Drag it until you can't drag it anymore. And then on the other side, we'll click and drag, and you can see here we're dragging it to 0. And then when we're done, we'll hit return or enter on the PC. So now we've got that edge going all the way around. And we'll do the same thing here. We've got the multi-cut. We'll click and drag. I'm not holding anything down, just click and drag. And same thing here, I'm not holding anything. Click and drag, and then hit return. And now when we hit the 3 key, you can see that those are four-sided faces on the bottom, which is what we want. We'll eventually bevel these edges to create the hard edge, obviously, but you can oftentimes hit the 3 key just to make sure that you don't have double extrusions, just to make sure that the edge flow is what you are anticipating. We'll hit the 1 key again, and let's just create a basic recess. We'll select these 4 faces using the Shift key to make multiple selections. Remember, when you're making face selections, always hit the 4 key just to make sure you didn't accidentally select anything on the other side. I'll go back to the 5 key, and we'll hit extrude. And this is going to be the offset, and we'll type in 0.8. So that is the size that we'll be using for these bricks here. We'll make that a 0.8. And now we're going to extrude again. If you accidentally had clicked off, or maybe you're coming back later after you've saved and you're picking it up here, you would just need to reselect those faces. And again, I'll hit 4. And that time I did accidentally select something on the other side. So an opportunity to demonstrate Control, bounding box select, and that will deselect while maintaining what wasn't beneath that bounding box selection with the Control key. All right, we've got that selected. I'll go ahead and hit 5 since we verified. And we'll hit extrude. And we're going to move this one on the Z, and this will be negative 4. Negative 4. So we've got local translate Z -4, whole number. And if we hit the 4 key, we can see how that was pulled up underneath. We'll hit the 5 key to see that. And we'll consider this our basic brick. We don't have the recessed peg, and on a 1x1 we wouldn't have the pipe cylinder anyway. But for the advanced version of this 1x1, we will ultimately create that little indentation. If you look at toy bricks, you can see that there's an indentation beneath each of the pegs. But for today, the final thing that we'll do is just bevel these edges so that when we hit the 3 key, it maintains its hard edge. And hitting the 3 key is a preview of what happens when we subdivide, which is how we'll end this model today. I'm also going to go ahead and hide my grid since we no longer need it. And I'll tap the 1 key to get back, and we're going to make a series of edge selections. I'm going to tap the Q key, and we'll right click and choose edge. And this can be a little tricky. You may want to save here in case you make a mistake, and you can just open it back up, or you can hit undo. But this can cause a little bit of problem in terms of making a bad selection. So potential for mistake here. We'll try to go slow. I'm going to double click that top edge. So let's just look at that. So that's our first square edge selection on the top. I'll shift double click this edge. So now we have two square edge selections. We'll shift double click the third. So 1, 2, 3 squares. And the interior, we have to select all around. So I'm going to shift double click. That just gave me these two. Shift double click, shift double click, shift double click. I'll hit the 4 key, and we can see that we've got 4 squares, right? You can see the 4 squares here in this view. And if we dolly around, I'll dolly around slowly. And make sure at this point that you've got those 4 square edges selected. Now we'll select corner edges. I'll come back to the 5 key. We'll hold down the shift key and click this edge, dolly around, shift click this edge, dolly around, shift click this edge, dolly around, and shift click this edge. Oops, I missed it. Hit the 4 key just to make sure, so we've got those corner edges all the way around, in addition to our 4 squares. I'll hit the 5 key again. And now we want these 4 diagonal edges. Now I don't want to double click these, because it would also select this edge if I did double click. So that's why we're not double clicking these edges, these corner edges. We're manually selecting them all the way around. So shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click. I've got those corner, or I should say diagonal edges, and we'll get the interior corner edges. So that's our final set to select. Shift click, dolly around, shift click, and shift click. So those are all the edges that we want to bevel. I'll hit the 4 key. We've got the 4 squares, we've got the exterior edges, we've got the diagonal edges, and we've got the interior edges selected. So essentially, except maybe focus for a moment on the blue, we don't have the edges that exist on the faces. I'll hit the 5 key. That's a clean selection. Again, if you missed an edge or you accidentally selected an edge that you didn't want to have selected, you can reopen from the last save, or you can just hit undo and re-execute what we're about to do, which is the bevel. So I'll click bevel, and once again, for all of our bricks, the fractions are going to be 0.2 and the segments are going to be 2. And so now we have, right, and you definitely want to dolly around. I'm going to hit the Q key to get out of that. You can hit the 4 key, and you can dolly around, and we've got good selection. Note also, everything is still 4-sided, so we have quads. Even though these are small, they are 4-sided. Here we've got 4-sided. And then we've got tries on the top, right? A 3-side is referred to as a tri, but once we subdivide it, it will create quads up there. So we have nice tight, right? Here's 1. We can hit 3 as a preview for the subdivision. And that all looks good. If it didn't, again, if you missed an edge or you accidentally selected an edge that we didn't want, undo back or reopen and just give it a second shot. And we'll actually subdivide this. Now you would want to save. It's always a good idea to save at every increment. So right, we might want to come back to this for some reason. So before you subdivide a shape, that is mesh smooth here, and smooth means that we're subdividing it, we're doubling everything, and you want to save a version before you subdivide or smooth. But I'm going to execute it here, mesh smooth, and there is what it looks like, and we can even hit the 3 from here and get a nice good view of that 1-by-1 brick. Now the final thing that we'll do before we call it a day is we'll put the pivot at the bottom. Right now, remember, we put the pivot for our peg, which is great for the starting point for creating all of our additional bricks. But now that we've got this brick, it's probably best to have the pivot at the bottom. So once again, we'll tap the D key, we'll drive it down on the translate Y, and we'll leave it yellow. And then we'll come in here, get nice and tight, and we're going to V snap, vertex or point snap, to the very bottom center. So I'm holding down the V key, middle mouse button click, and we jump down to that position, and then to get out of the reposition pivot mode, I'm tapping the D key one more time. And now we can grid snap this up to the ground plane. We'll say grid snap that up to the ground plane. And then just a couple of words here in terms of snapping these together. So different bricks may be different sizes, and you may, if you're importing one that's a little bit larger or smaller, you'll have to determine how you want to snap them together. We can see that left, right, this will work fine. I'm going to come up to Edit, Duplicate, and I'll grid snap this over, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 units, and that looks good, right? Those are sitting right next to each other, or I use the grid snapping. We could duplicate or grid snap as many times as we wanted. But if we do it upwards, I'm going to, once again, come to Edit, Duplicate. You could do the shortcut, Command D. And if I grid snap this up, right, it's a little bit too high. So we can snap to an edge on this brick here. So if we look, that would be a good candidate. Let's turn on our wireframe so that we have something to snap to. And I'm going to snap this brick down to that intersection. And we're going to limit ourselves on the Y. So this is another example of when we want to use the constraint. We want to constrain ourselves on the Y, right? Get in there real tight, and then with the V key, right? V for vertex or point, I'll middle mouse button, snap that down, and that's about where we would want it. I'll duplicate this one, Edit, Duplicate, and let's move this over. We can also V snap this one over into position, and we can begin to develop bricks that fit together precisely. All right, this, as I mentioned at the beginning, is the workflow that we'll use for creating all of our bricks. Any size brick, use these same tools and techniques in this workflow. So you want to become familiar using the tools, right? We use the extrude tool, we use the bevel tool, we use the multi-cut tool, and then we used a variety of snapping. And we use snapping with our pivot point reposition, tapping the D key as well. So those are the tools and techniques that we'll be using for all the subsequent bricks. So you may want to do this several times, and I would even recommend doing it the number of times that it takes for you to be able to produce this without referring back to the instructions. Then you'll be ready to go for the upcoming lessons, which build on these principles. All right, questions in the tech discussion forum. Have a good one. Greetings. In this section of the video, we will create a 1x2 brick. We'll begin with our starting peg, and we'll create a duplicate. We'll come up to Edit, Duplicate. If you look in the outliner, we now have 2 meshes, and we'll grid snap this 4 units, let's say in the negative Z direction. So because our pivot's at the bottom, we can just grid snap right here in the perspective view. Now, these are 2 separate geometry, so we will select them both, and then in our modeling toolkit, we'll come and select Combine. Combine. Now, even though this is a singular mesh, and you can see that here in the outliner, as an aside, we have some transform nodes left over, and so to get rid of those, we'll delete our history. So we'll come to, with our current mesh selected in object mode, we'll come to Edit, Delete by Type History, and now we're left with our singular polycylinder 3. The transform nodes for those original objects have been deleted with the history. Okay, now if we hit the 3 key, we can see that we have a singular object, but the vertices did not weld. They were not merged in that process of combining. If I come back to the 1 key, and just to demonstrate, I can pick one of the vertices on the border of the 2 original meshes, and you can see that while it's a singular object, we have 2 vertices here and they are not connected. Same thing here, and then same thing here. That's why when we hit the 3 key, right, these aren't welded. So we can do this as one function. We'll zoom out a little bit and just draw a bounding box. I selected vertex at 9 o'clock, drew a bounding box, so I have all of my vertices selected. And we'll come to merge. We'll come to edit mesh, merge, and we'll open the dialog box just so that I can show you that the merge threshold is so small that only the vertices sitting right on top of each other, in other words, these 6 here, 2, 4, 6, only those will be merged. These other vertices are close, but they're not within that threshold. So we don't have to worry about getting an inadvertent merge or weld on these vertices that are very close to each other, but they're not sitting on top of each other like these 6 are. And so we'll hit merge, and then we can verify that. We can hit the move tool, and you can see that that has merged. The middle one has merged, and this third set out here of vertices is now singular, it's 1. You can hit the 3 key. We still have a rounded edge out here. We'll solve that when we bevel at the very end. But this singular polycylinder 3, currently named, is a single mesh. And then we can pick up with the same tools and techniques that we used on the first part of this video to complete the process of creating our brick. So we'll double click the outer edge, hit the 4 key just so that you can see that. And we'll come and we'll extrude. We're going to extrude this edge. And you'll recall that we went negative 4.8 units based on the size of our peg. This would be the height of our brick. You can hit the 5 key and see that. Now, this edge is currently selected, so we can come up and come to fill hole, but if you were to click off it for some reason, you can double click and we'll just verify, right? We've got that bottom edge loop, and we'll come up to mesh fill hole with our edge loop selected, and that fills it in. But also, as you'll recall, we want all of our faces to be 4-sided. Currently, this is an n-gon, multiple faces more than 4. So we'll once again use our multi-cut tool, and we'll click drag, and then on the other side we'll click drag and we'll hit return. And we'll just repeat that process. Click drag till it stops, come to the other side, click drag, and then return or enter on the keyboard. Click drag and click drag, return, and then we've got one across. Click drag and we'll dolly around, click drag, and we'll hit return. And if we hit the 3 key, we can see that the mesh is indeed 4-sided, but it's soft. We'll eventually bevel those edges to keep them hard. Come back to the 1 mode, and I'm going to hide my grid, and we'll extrude. So we're going to select the faces now. And recall that when you select faces, good idea to hit the 4 key just to make sure you didn't accidentally select something else. And you can see here that I did. So I'll hold down the Control key and draw a bounding box around that. Whenever you're selecting faces, good idea to hit the 4 key, make sure you have a clean selection. Use the Control key bounding box selection to ensure or to deselect the inadvertently selected faces. So we just have those faces on the bottom. I'll come back to the 5 key and we'll hit extrude. Now we're back to extruding faces, and we're going to have an offset of 0.8. So offset 0.8, you can scrub the word offset or you can just type in 0.8. And with those selected, if you were to click off, you just need to reselect those, but I have a clean selection here. So I'll immediately extrude a second time. And we're going to move this up -4. -4 on the translate Z. And that pulled that back up in there. We have a recess. We can hit the 4 key and we can see that that is a proper brick. In our intermediate and advanced versions, we'll create the recesses and the pipes or cylinders of the larger bricks. But for now, we'll consider this a clean set of geometry. Final thing to do, right, we hit the 3 key and we can see that that's soft all the way around. We'll need to make that selection. In this case, we're selecting rectangle, and we need to double click twice on that top one. I'll click off and do that again. So we're about to bevel. We double clicked, shift double click, so I have the top rectangle. We'll do the same down here. We'll shift double click. Now that gave us the entire rectangle at once. We'll get the interior bottom, so I'll shift double click. We got that one all at once. And then we'll need to make multiple selections on this interior. We can shift double click, shift double click, shift double click, and shift double click. And so we'll hit the 4 key, and oops, I missed that one. So we can see all the way around. Right, we've got the 4 rectangular loops selected. Now we'll come and select the corners. So we've got these 4 corners on the outside. Shift click. I'm not double clicking because that would select this edge up here, and we don't want to bevel that. So manually selecting, shift click, not a double click this time. Shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click, the 4 diagonals, and then the 4 interior corners. 1, 2, I'm holding the shift key, 3, and 4. And so that is the complete selection of edges. And if you missed one or had one you didn't need, you could simply undo. And we'll come out and we'll click on bevel, and our fraction is 0.2, and our segments are 2. And we'll right click, hit the Q key, we'll right click to object mode, hit the 5 key, and we can see that we now have a 1x2 brick. Now this is 1 degree of smoothing, and so we'll go ahead and execute that now. Our goal is to subdivide this once, and so we can save this out, and you can label it, and then we'll come back and we'll subdivide this or smooth this once. So mesh, smooth. And there is our completed brick, our completed 1x2 brick, and you can save this one out. And this is the one that you'll use in your projects, a subdivided 1x2. Now let's position the pivot point, same as we did for the previous. We'll come into one of our orthographic views, and we'd like that to be at the bottom. So repositioning the pivot is tapping the D key, and we'll just get it down here into the proximity. And I'll use my Control Command bounding box selection to zoom in there. And I'll move that down a little bit further because I want a V-snap here to the bottom. I'm constrained on the Y, as you'll recall, and then we'll hold down the V key and middle mouse button and snap that to that bottom vertex, limited on the Y. And then we'll remember to get out of the reposition pivot mode by tapping the D. And now we can grid snap this up onto the ground plane, and we would save this out, and you could call this your 1x2 simple final, right? Because we don't have the interior recesses, which would make this our advanced version. Okay, questions in the discussion forum. Have a good one. Greetings. In this video, we will create a 1x1 plate. We'll use the same workflow that we used to create the 1x1 brick. The only difference is the height. A plate is 1/3 the height of a standard brick. We'll begin by double-clicking the outer edge. We'll come to the modeling toolkit, and we'll hit extrude. And our standard height was 4.8. So 1/3 of 4.8 is 1.6. And we're going in the negative z direction. So negative 1.6. And that gives us the height of our brick, 1/3 the standard height. I'm going to go ahead and hide my grid. Now with that edge still selected, we'll come up to Mesh Fill Hole, and we'll hit the 5 key. You can see that that is now filled in. And we've got an in-gon here, and we want to make sure that everything is 4-sided. So we'll come and use our multi-cut, and we'll just click, drag, return, click, drag, return. And we've got 4 sides all the way around. Now hit your Q key. When you're using the multi-cut tool, it's not uncommon to inadvertently make additional cuts. So once you're done with the multi-cut tool, it's a good habit to just hit the Q key so that you get out of the multi-cut tool. And we'll right click and choose face, and we'll grab these bottom 4 faces. And you'll recall that anytime you're making face selections, it's a good idea to hit the 4 key just to make sure you've got a clean selection. You didn't accidentally select something on the other side. If I had, I could hold down the control key and draw a bounding box around what I wanted to deselect. All right, with those 4 bottom faces selected, we'll hit extrude, and the offset, as you'll recall, is 0.8, and so that gives us our recess here. Oops, I put in a 5, 0.8, and we'll hit return. I clicked on the panel and I was hitting the 5 to get back to shaded mode, and it actually was still, this field was still active, so it input 0.85. That's why it's always a good idea once you're done inputting fields to click back on the panel to get back to your keyboard shortcuts. All right, with those 4 faces selected, we'll hit extrude, and this is going to be negative 0.8 on the Z. So the local translate Z is negative 0.8, and that gives us our recess. Now, if we hit the 3 key, you can see that, right, it's still soft, and you'll recall that we need to bevel those outer edges. So I'll come back to the 1 key, I'll hit the Q key, and then we'll right click and grab edge. We'll double click that top square, shift double click the bottom square, shift double click the inner bottom square, and then shift double click 4 times on the interior recessed square, holding down the shift key for multiple selections. Now if I hit the 4 key, we can kind of get a view here, and you can see all 4 of those squares, those edge loop selections. Now we'll get the corners. We've got the 4 corners on the outside, and then we'll tackle the 4 diagonals here, and then we'll grab these inner or recessed corner edges. And so that is a clean selection all the way around. We can hit the 4 key, and I'll dolly there for you to see. And if you miss a selection, you'll just hit undo, or if you selected the wrong edge or you missed an edge, simply undo and make sure that you get a clean selection all the way around, and that looks good. And we'll come and we'll hit bevel. We know that our fraction is 0.2, our segments are 2, and there is our 1x1 plate. I'm going to right click, let's hit the Q key, and then right click to object mode. And we'll go ahead, a good idea to save it, but we're going to go ahead and finish it by subdividing it once. So mesh, smooth, and there you see our finalized geometry. We'll put the pivot at the bottom. We'll jump into the orthographic side view. Make sure that you're in object mode when you're repositioning the pivot. And we'll tap the D key to be able to reposition the pivot. I've selected the Y translate, so Y translate has gone from green to yellow. Yellow means I'm constrained. I'll hold down the V key and then middle mouse button click to the bottom. V snap that constrained on the Y, and now I'll tap the D a second time to get out of that mode. And now we've got the pivot exactly at the bottom, and we'll grid snap it up onto the ground plane. And there is our 1x1 peg. All right, in the 4th and final section, we'll do a 2x1 plate. Be right back. Greetings, welcome back. Let's create our final plate for this lesson, a 1x2. So we'll select our starting point peg. We'll come up to Edit, Duplicate. We'll select our Move tool, and then we'll grid snap it 4 units in the -Z. We'll Shift Select so we have them both selected as objects. You can see here in the outliner, polycylinder 1, polycylinder 2. And we'll hit Combine. And you recall from the first time that we did this, if we hit the 3 key, we can see that those vertices were not welded or merged. So we'll right-click to 9 o'clock vertex. We'll draw a bounding box around just all of the vertices, and we'll come up to Edit Mesh, Merge. Edit Mesh, Merge. And now those 6 vertices are now 3. They've been merged together. We'll double-click the outer edge. We'll hit Extrude, and as you recall, our Z for a plate is negative 1.6, 1/3 the standard height. We've got it open in the bottom with that edge still selected. We can come to Mesh Fill Hole, and then we'll grab our multi-cut tool and we'll just finish this off. So click, drag, return, click, drag, return, click, drag, return, and then click, drag, I missed it, there we go, return. And here is our 1x2 so far. I'll hit the Q key. Remember, when you're using the multi-cut, it's easy to accidentally make additional cuts. So whenever you're done, just immediately hit the Q key or select the next tool. So I hit the Q key, and now we can come back and choose these 8 faces. And when we're picking faces, we want to hit the 4 key to make sure we didn't get anything on the other side. If we had, you could use the Control key to deselect. We've got this here. We'll hit Extrude, and our offset is going to be 0.8. You can see that there with those still selected. We'll extrude a second time, and our local translate Z is going to be negative 0.8, and there's our recess. And then I'm going to hit the Q key, or let's just click on the select tool to get out of that. Click on the panel, and then I'm hitting 5. Right, you want to make sure the panel is active when you move back to using your keyboard shortcuts. So there's our shape. And we need, if we were to hit the 3 key, you can see that it's soft. So we'll select the outer edges. And in this case, I double-clicked, and we'll shift double-click. Oops, I got the wrong one. Shift double-click. I'm going to use the Control key, right? So I selected that wrong one. We eventually need to select it, but I'm just going to deselect it, so we're doing this all at once. Got that top outer rectangle. We'll do the bottom rectangle, and that allowed me to shift double click just once. We'll shift double click the interior bottom, and then in this view in the wireframe, I can shift double click. That gives me 1, shift double click 2, shift double click, and I got the wrong one there. Shift double click and shift double click. So once again, I've got the 4, in this case, rectangles. You can see those 4 rectangle selections there, rectangular edge loops. And now we'll select the corners, maybe easier in the 5 mode. Shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click. I'll hide the grid so we can see a little bit easier. Diagonal, 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 diagonal. My shift key, and then interior corner, interior corner, interior corner, and interior corner. 4 key, so you can see that selection all the way around. If you miss one or select a wrong one, just undo and correct the selection. We'll hit bevel. Our bevel is 0.2 for the fraction. Our segments are 2. And then I'm going to click on the select tool or hit the Q key. And looks like a clean selection. We can hit the 5 key, dolly around. And this is our basic, right? We don't have the interior recesses of these pegs. But we'll be able to use these when we're stacking and we're not seeing the bottom. These would be the ones that we would use. And then we'll want to finish this. You can save it, right, at this point. Always a good idea. But we'll come to the object mode, mesh, smooth. We've subdivided it once, smooth and subdivide. We'll right-click back to object. Make sure you're in object mode when we reposition the pivot. I'll come to the side view. We'll pick the move tool. We'll tap the D key. We'll make that Y translate active. V key, middle mouse button to snap that to the bottom. D key, once again to get out of the reposition mode, and then we can grid snap that up onto the ground plane. And there is our 1x2 brick. All right. Questions in the discussion forum. Have a good one.